Saundra Dalton-Smith, welcome to the Lean Out podcast. How are you today?
I am great. Happy to be here with you.
Me too. Excellent. So, for those people who are listening that are not familiar with you, can you please introduce yourself? Tell us about your current work life balance and how it might be different from other people in your profession.
25 years in clinical practice as an internal medicine physician near the Birmingham, Alabama area. Burned out about 5 years into clinical practice and really kind of took a journey with God, trying to figure out how do I survive this practice? How do I stay within medicine? Because I loved it. And so that took me to research and that took me to writing what I researched. And so now basically I spend a lot of my time as a workplace wellness consultant helping other people understand how to overcome burnout through a series of events that led me to the discovery of what I call the 7 types of rest framework. It's a way of negotiating with your energy so that you have energy for the things that you love and also energy for the work that you feel assigned to do. So that's me in a nutshell. I also have 2 sons. Both of them are in college right now. Married for 25 years as well. Got married right after residency. I don't recommend it. Give yourself some time because it does put a lot of stress on a relationship. And currently in a season of life where I am, as some people say, an empty nester. I call it a professional launcher. I don't like the sound of empty nest. So I launched my kids into their college years and now sitting to see the fruit of that.
That's awesome. Gretchen Rubin, the happiness expert, she calls it the open door period or like revolving door. So the kids can still come and go.
Hmm.
They're available to, she's always open. And it's nice to think of it in a different way. I definitely agree. Empty nest is a term that just seems not very satisfying.
No, my husband and I were like, we're not calling ourselves that. So
Yeah.
it's like, it sounds like you're missing something. And honestly, it's been just a beautiful time of self discovery, of being able to have a lot of your own time and space back.
That's wonderful. So I would love to get into the 7 types of rest framework, but first I want to ask you a little bit more about how your days look because you are still doing some clinical practice. Is that correct?
Hmm.
So tell me about what amount of time of a typical week you spend doing clinical work. What does it look like? And then your travels to do speaking and consulting. What kind of adventures does that bring you to?
So initially I was doing what we call traditional internal medicine. In other words, I saw my own patients in the hospital, I saw them in the office, I admitted them from the ER. So it was kind of all over the place. And that's honestly probably where the burnout came from. So obviously I'm a little bit older than some people who may be listening. I was in the days before hospitalist. So that's kind of how internal medicine was set up at that time. So now my focus has been kind of transitioned rather than spending my time kind of split in all of these different places. I no longer do any hospital based medicine. I primarily focus on outpatient based. I'm part partner within the 10 physician group practice that I have been working in. And so I am able to do more administrative type things now that I'm a senior in that position. And so a lot of my time right now is spent with nurse practitioner oversight. And so I would probably say in a given week, maybe 10, 15 hours a week is spent on the nurse practitioner oversight related duties. There are 7 nurse practitioners that I oversee. And the good part about that is I don't necessarily have to be present every single week. So like last 2 weeks, I was in South Africa doing a speaking tour where I spoke 5 different times. And so other times I might be home for an entire month, like in this month. This month I'm home the entire month. I'm really intentional because there's things I wanted to do with family. I want to catch up on some things as it relates to the certification programs and other things that we do. So I'm able to dissect my time in such a way that it allows me to be present at the office when I need to be, but not also be bound by it. And so that was really important to me after so many years in clinical practice where I did feel kind of confined to certain things. And I know that looks different for different people, but I love sharing that because I think sometimes as physicians, we think, oh, If I'm not working in the office, if I'm not seeing patients or in the hospital, how am I going to make the income that I'm accustomed to making as a physician? I mean, we all come out of the gate making six figures plus. So I think most of us don't realize that that same skill that we learn that helps us to treat patients actually helps us to help people in so many other ways. And the income can be comparable, if not better, which honestly, for myself, I make more now than I did in my clinical practice.
Very interesting. Yeah, and I think you're right that people tend to have a very narrow view of what their skills can afford them to do. And that's why we do this podcast to show physicians and other professionals that they can branch out and do things that are completely unconventional and still live a life as a professional, whether that is involving clinical work or it's just branching out into completely other areas. So you do quite a bit of travel for doing motivational speaking and giving workshops and seminars. Is that correct?
I do. I don't do as much motivational speaking anymore. Most of it is based around the workplace well-being. So we do a lot of trainings. We do a lot of facilitations with groups, hospitals, residency programs. We do a lot of work with helping people understand how to put the 7 types of rest framework that I've developed into practice and giving them some just assessments and practical tools of being able to do that. I do motivational speaking, but that's probably of the amount of speaking I do. I would probably say maybe 15%, the majority of it is more instructional or direct content based around that concept.
Okay, so let's get into that a little bit. So you mentioned that you had a period of burnout that really prompted you to look into this and to develop this rest framework. Talk to me about what was going on at the time and why you decided to figure out what different types of rests are out there for people.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like you get to a place of desperation and it's like nobody is helping me here, so I just got to have to help myself. Is where I got to. So 5 years into clinical practice, my husband and I decided it was the right time to have kids. Um and I had 2 toddlers both under the age of 2. I remember working 50, 60 hours a week, as I mentioned, traditional internal medicine, so everywhere, hospital, office, ER, all over the place, seeing people. And I just recall coming home one day and was like, I don't know how I'm supposed to do this for 50 years. One of the physicians in our practice was literally 80 years old. And I'm like, how I don't even know how anybody can do this for that long and be sane. And I started to really realize that medical school and residency and all of that taught me how to do the job, but they didn't teach me how to be sustainable in the job. They didn't teach me actually how to keep joy, how to actually enjoy the process and not just feel like I'm grinding it out day and night. And I didn't want to feel like that. My life looked very successful. Everybody's, looking on the outside. You have a job, you have a career, you have kids, family, it looks very successful on the outside, but didn't feel successful to live. And I didn't want that to be my next 50 years. So I started asking this question, what what kind of tired am I? Because I was exhausted on all fronts. But sleeping was not helping it. I go to bed, I purposely try to go to bed and get 8, 9 hours. Didn't matter. I'd wake up exhausted every single day. So I started asking the question, what kind of tired am I? And I started looking at where was I expending energy every day? Because it wasn't just sleep type energy. I was spending energy with patients, with diagnosing, with walking around, lifting patients, all sorts of stuff. There was all kind of thing, energy being expended. And then I started looking at how am I getting that energy back? How am I filling back up these buckets that I'm pouring out of? And I noticed there were some specific buckets that I poured out of every day, emotionally, socially, creatively. I had no avenue for pouring back into, didn't even know where to begin. And so that's kind of where the process started. I was just looking at how can I improve my creativity today? How can I improve my emotional energy today? And looking at the research, doing a compilation of the research, which I know sounds kind of like you're exhausted, so you're doing more research. I was desperate. When you're desperate, you will do things that do not make sense. I was exhausted looking for any lifeline I could find. A big part of that for myself came through looking through the scripture and kind of deciding, I feel like if anyone did things correctly in the world, it was Jesus. So I was like, how did he rest? In 3 years, he did more than most of us could ever do with healing people. So how did he rest? So I started looking at that. I was looking at anything that I could. And there was a lot of research out there about restorative practices, but they weren't pulled together in a way that people could apply them to their lives. It was just great research that was out there. And, there were things I was seeing on JAMA and things I was seeing on all these different platforms. And it's like, let me put this together in a way that I can actually apply it to my life. And that's where the 7 types of rest framework came from. I was just trying to take what I was learning in all these different places, put it together, kind of like encapsulize it so I could actually start doing it in my life. And when I started noticing the change in me, people started noticing it. And they would say, wow, you're glowing. You look like you have more energy. You look happier, and all these things. And I started sharing some of those things with my patients. I just wrote them out I wasn't trying to write a book at the time. I just had these little handouts that I would like type up on my computer and have my nurse like make copies of. And we would give them to patients when they came in and said, I'm tired and nothing's helping. And I couldn't find anything wrong with them. And they're just still saying they're tired. So we just had like these little handouts we gave them that gave the briefest synopsis of the 7 types of rest. And when I say it was as if people were like, oh, do you have any more of those handouts? I gave mine to my friend. I need 3 or 4 more of those. My husband needs, and I'm like, what's happening here? And so, and I started getting these referrals. I'd always had a busy practice, but it was kind of, it was kind of like most medical practice. You have patients, but it's not like overflowing. The gates flew off the hinges. All of a sudden I was getting referrals from everywhere. People were crossing state lines to come see me. And I'm like, I've stepped into something here. And what I stepped into was being able to share a concept with people that was so simple, but no one had ever brought it together in such a way that it made it so accessible. And that's what's the 7 types of rest framework.
It's just beautiful. I love that idea. And I also love that the book is actually titled Sacred Rest, because rest truly is sacred. It's something that human beings have been doing since the very beginning of human beings. And it's wonderful to think that these are simple concepts that just needed to be put together in a way that could be absorbable. So tell us the 7 types so that people can get familiar and think about, what might be a rest deficit for them.
Yeah. And so the 7 include physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, social, sensory, and creative. And we developed a free assessment at restquiz.com where people can take the assessment. It takes like 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how much you overthink the questions, and gives you an answer on the score in each of those 7 areas. Because for most people, there's usually 1 or 2 that's just the issue. That's the thing that you're not addressing. And so if you're able to diagnose your greatest rest deficit, you can then be really intentional about getting rest and doing restorative practices within that type of rest. And I think that's the mindset shift most people have to make, is that rest is not simply about cessation. It's not just about stopping. It's about doing things that actually pour back into the place of depletion. And so identifying the place of depletion then gives you a greater likelihood of finding the activities that restore you in that area.
So this goes a little bit further in some of the things that I teach in my confidence course and that I've talked a lot about on this podcast, which is really the theme of energy management. And I usually talk about it in a very general sense of like what things are depleting your energy and what things raise your energy or increase your bank account. And so then, you want to maximize those and minimize the depletions. But what you're really getting at is figuring out the specific areas where you can pour back into those specific cups, which is great. And I want to mention that when you just tried to sleep more, it didn't restore you. I am one of the people where I took the quiz and my largest deficit was the physical rest. So it does sometimes, work out that way, that is the thing that you need the most. So I definitely recommend it, and we'll link it in the show notes so that anyone who's listening can take this assessment. I want to ask you, because you've referenced the sacredness of rest, and you have a new book called Being Fully Known. So how does your faith inform all of this work that you do?
It's a huge part of the work for me, and I'm sensitive to the fact because I mean, I work with Fortune 100 companies, so I can't go in there and necessarily start talking faith necessarily. But I
Yeah.
do include spiritual rest as one of the types of rest, and I approach it in a generalized approach because I know everyone's not at the same place in their faith or even in the same religion as I am. So I think for the most part, a big part of the way that I show up in the world, I believe in being authentically who you are. Faith is a part of who I am. So I'm not going to ignore it, but I'm also not going to alienate people because they don't believe what I believe. And so I think there's a balance between you being authentic and you being judgmental. And so being able to understand the difference between that. So I oftentimes challenge people and I tell them, yeah, I talk about faith in all of my books, but I invite you into a conversation with me at where I'm at, and then I'm happy to have a conversation with you at where you're at. And so when someone picks up a book, I think the book should be authentic to the person who wrote it. And you're basically entering into conversation with them based on the things that are important to them.
Do you see that it's difficult for professionals like medical professionals to be authentic in the workplace?
I think in certain situations it definitely can. As I mentioned, I'm part of a 10 physician group practice, physician owned practice where I'm part partner. I do what I want to do. You know what I mean? So I have a level of control that I realize some of my friends who are with HMO agencies or that are hired by the hospital may not have the privilege to do. I do realize that. I find it interesting that some of my colleagues locally colleagues who are in that situation still find ways of bringing their faith into it. For example, one of the surgeons that I know is hired by the hospital. I mean, he's an employee inside the hospital. He likes to pray with his patients. That's kind of iffy, with the hospital. They don't necessarily want that to be part of the contract. And so the way he gets around that is he doesn't pray out loud with the patients, but before every patient, he prays about that patient. So the patient may not know and the hospital may not know, but he's still honoring who he is in his faith by doing it in his own time. So before he ever, in his words, while I'm scrubbing my hands, I'm scrubbing my heart. So he is preparing his heart to not go in there and just see a body on the table, but to recognize this is a person who is loved and I should treat them with care and respect and whatever else he get praise about. And I think so that it's important to realize there are ways to honor who you are, even in that type of setting.
Yes, I agree with that. I actually just incidentally recently saw a post in one of the anesthesia groups that I'm in where a woman said that she was written up by a nurse because she asked for everyone to pray right before she had this patient go to sleep. And I felt saddened by that. But at the same time, like you said, there's a fine line between balancing your authenticity and then someone else perceiving it in a way that it is judgmental or it's just taken the wrong way. And I do think you're onto something, which is that what we need to do is take it into our own hands and do what we can do on our own. And somehow that energy is going to get imparted on the patient or whoever it is that you're directing it to.
Yeah, one thing that he told me that I thought was so God. I'm just going to say it plainly. Um, he mentioned one patient wakes up from the anesthesia and he goes and checks them in the recovery room, before they head off wherever they go. And he said the patient woke up and looked at him and said, "You prayed for me, didn't you?" And he was able to say, "I did. How did you know that?" She's like, "I felt peace right before I went to sleep." And I thought, you know what? What an encouragement to that surgeon. That might have been the only person who's ever said that out of thousands of surgeries. But that person was like sensitive enough to those kind of things to recognize something happened here, whereas other people may not recognize that, but still benefit from it. And I thought, what a beautiful encouragement that even though you never said it out loud, you never told me you were praying for me, I sense your prayers. Even when we can't share ourselves authentically necessarily in those kind of settings, our desire to to be of service to people, the heart position in which we go into the work we do, I think patients recognize that sometimes, even if they don't know how to say it.
Yes. And that applies to so many things. And really, what you're getting at is the integrity of just doing things without expecting something in return, and how it makes you feel to just offer the love or whatever it is that you are doing to try to help other people, to be in service of other people. If they don't respond, that doesn't mean you stop doing it. It's like writing a book or doing a podcast. You don't get reviews or you don't get people telling you how awesome it is, but you still go and you still do it. And that's part of being authentic as well.
Yeah, actually, I consider that part of spiritual rest. Spiritual rest, particularly if someone says, I'm not a spiritual person, I don't believe in God. Some of my coaching clients and patients are atheists. And I tell them, you still need spiritual rest because whether you believe in a faith based system or not, spiritual rest doesn't change. It's the need we all have for a sense of purpose and belonging, a sense that our life gives back to the greater good. So whether you put faith on that or not, you still have a part of you that needs to connect and be filled in that way. It's the good feeling we get when we do good. And so everybody benefits from that. And so I think every person has to take a look at their life and think, where are the places where I get filled up just because I show up as a good person in the world? Maybe it's volunteerism. Maybe it's a cause that you get behind. And you know that you're not going to necessarily get anything financially or tangibly back. What you get back is spiritual rest from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else that in particular you wish that busy professionals knew about being present, about rest?
Yeah, I think, my newest book is titled Being Fully Known. And I think one of the sections, the subtitle is The Joyful Satisfaction of Beholding, Becoming, and Belonging. And I think the middle part, that becoming part, is such a game changer for someone who is feeling unsatisfied or unfulfilled in their current work. And I do a lot of physician retreats and activities and coaching related to physician burnout and physicians who feel like there's got to be more to this than where I'm currently at. And I believe a big part of that is the becoming aspect of it because they have spent so much time training for that particular career. They feel locked in. They feel like, well, this is all I can do. This is who I am. And a career or a title is never meant to be our identity. And there's a level of identity fatigue that comes when you are not in alignment with the different aspects of your character, your personality, your gifting. And so I think for a lot of people, there's opportunities to evaluate what are gifts, talents, things that I love to do, things I enjoy that I've been kind of putting on the back burner because this is who I am. I'm a doctor. This is who I am. I'm a nurse or whatever the title may be. And allowing themselves to just explore. I think we need to have a level of constant kind of adventure and exploration with our gifts and our talents to see what else might there be that can be monetized to some way, bring greater satisfaction, open the door to new opportunities, step us into things that we only dreamed were possible and didn't think could be a reality. I believe we block ourselves in with our titles and our degrees.
So true. You're definitely speaking my language and the whole love language of this podcast. So thank you so much for that. And you mentioned retreats. We met at the 2025 Revitalized Physician Renewal Retreat.
Yeah, I think that retreat is a great opportunity for physicians to explore, to actually be able to take a step back and to think about what do I want out of life? what do I want my days to feel like? What do I want my time to look like? How do I want to spend my energy? Are there new things that are available to me, maybe that I haven't taken a step back to even explore, to dream again? It's a great opportunity for creative rest. Creative rest has to do with being in beautiful locations and allowing the beauty around you to unlock creativity inside of you. And so the poetry and the all the different aspects helps you to get outside of the part of the brain that we've been using for all these years. We are very logical brained. We are really focused in the things that are logic based and that are rationale, can quickly put together and come up with a diagnosis. I think it takes a little bit of time to allow the relational, open aspect of our brain to unlock again. And I feel like that retreat's a great opportunity for that.
Yeah, definitely. Saundra, is there any last advice you have for listeners who are feeling stuck, feeling lost or overwhelmed or on the treadmill of achievement and can't get off?
Yeah, I think the last thought I would probably have is simply this. y- you know, Being achievement driven is a great, it gets you far, you accomplish a lot of things, but I sometimes think about it as the honeybee concept. And so a honeybee is busy producing honey, busy doing all the stuff, and it's producing something that everybody else is enjoying. Everybody else is tasting it and saying how sweet and lovely it is, but the bee never gets to taste it itself. And
Mm.
that's where a lot of us are living. We are producing so much sweetness in the world for everybody else. We're healing people. We are birthing babies. We're doing surgeries. We're doing whatever it is that we're doing right in the world, whether you're a physician or some other career. You're producing sweetness in the world, but when do you get to taste it for yourself? That's when life feels satisfying. You have to have moments where you're tasting and seeing the beauty of your life itself for yourself. And that's the invitation. That's the invitation in the work that I do. That's the invitation in what your podcast is doing. That's the invitation of the retreat we just mentioned. We have to actually taste our lives and appreciate the sweetness within it. And it requires moments of rest.
Yes, I love that analogy. It's just beautiful. I've never heard it said that way. So thank you for that. Sandra, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you or your work?
Well, I have a podcast as well, and you've been on it, Don. So choosemybestlife.com is the name of my podcast, and there's a website by the same name. I choose my best life. There's also, I would probably say, the rest quiz would be a great place to start for most people. If you're exhausted, I just mentioned that again. Take the quiz. You get a score and then start there. If you're like me and everything's bad, I started off all seven were wrong. So start with one. Start with the one that you feel like is most affecting you. Start getting intentional about getting rest in that area and go from there.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. It's been wonderful talking to you today.
You as well. Be blessed.
Thanks.